Hello. This is week 6. We're going to talk about domestic violence and our response to it. And one of the most difficult things about domestic violence is that it is deeply personal to the people involved. And so you have very strong emotions that are tied to it. So you're responding because, of course, our mission is to keep the peace, right? And so whenever somebody calls in and says, I hear yelling, screaming, glass breaking, I hear a disturbance, right? We're responding to make sure that there's not somebody that's in need of intervention and to make sure that we have uh, that we might be able to intervene and keep the peace. So, um, of course, depending on sometimes it's the victim that calls, sometimes it's a neighbor that calls, sometimes it's like a child in the household that calls. And so we have to kind of try to piece together what exactly is going on. And so when officers respond to a domestic, it's uh, the first order of business that we have at the scene is to determine is there an actual disturbance and what type of disturbance, and then is there a law violation? Do we have a cooperative victim? These kinds of things. And so, uh, obviously, a lot of the same principles apply no matter what kind of disturbance that it is. So, when officers show up on the scene, we're going to talk about separating the parties. We're going to talk about, um, getting uh, getting the parties separate enough that they're not prone to engage with one another, but yet not so far separated that we lose contact with our partners. Because, in particular, until you have more people on scene, you're each other's backup in addition to being the thing. So, um, uh, once you've determined what's happening, so a lot of times this is how it goes. Neighbor hears yelling and screaming. This is a regular thing. Uh, they call the police. The police show up, knock on the door, and they say, "Oh, we were just having an argument," right? And you don't see signs of injuries. Nobody claims to be injured. And so, what do you do? What do you do in that situation? And that is, again, we're here to keep the peace. And so, you talk to the parties that are involved, and you try to determine, is there a solution that can get us through in the short term, right? And if there is, where somebody leaves, goes, stays with a friend, family member, blows off some steam, whatever, and then the next day or hours later or whatever, when they get back together and everybody's cooled off, then it tends to go back to equilibrium. But then we also have these situations where it devolves into this cycle of abuse, and um, so you have a crisis. You have somebody that's getting beat up, and maybe they don't call the cops, but the neighbor does, and so we show up. We see fresh bruises. We see evidence that there is uh, violence, but yet the victim you know, does not want to press charges because they don't want to have their partner get arrested. Sometimes it's because they're afraid of their partner and what they might do if they cooperate. Um, it's a whole mess, right? And so, as frustrating as that is to deal with from the standpoint of law enforcement, the recognition that this is a real phenomenon. It is a pattern of abuse. They call it what's the word I'm trying to think of? Battered woman syndrome, and it's where despite repeated abusive behavior, uh, they stay, and we cannot force the situation. However, the law in most states has some degree of a compulsory kind of a policy regarding domestic violence. Now, some states, if you can prove that domestic violence took place, you will make an arrest, period, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Other states like Missouri are a little bit more conservative in that way, and that is that we have what's called a 12-hour rule. And that is that if you're called back to the same residence and you have evidence that there was physical domestic violence and that you can identify the arresting party, then you must arrest them. There's pros and cons, and it can be debated what would be the best policy regarding that, because anytime you have a compulsory arrest policy, it's it's going to be applied in situations where maybe it shouldn't be, but the reason that these policies exist in the first place is because, at least up until that kind of a policy existed, no victim, no crime. Like, if your victim doesn't want to cooperate, doesn't want to press charges, then you can't press charges in most cases for most things. And so recognizing that is why we have restrictions on our discretion to some extent when it comes to domestic violence incidents, is because in Missouri, you can absolutely make a probable cause arrest for domestic violence, even if the victim is standing there and telling you that they don't want to press charges. So, whereas if I respond to, let's say, just a ordinary disturbance, where the parties are not in a relationship, and I come up and somebody's got a black eye and they tell me that he hit me, and then I say, well, do you want to press charges? And they say, no victim, no crime, right? But if it's this guy's wife, then I can still make that arrest. And so there's a lot of people that are in a bad situation that way, and we want to help, but there's only so much that we can do. And even with the mandatory, or even with being able to make that arrest, it does not stop the prosecutor's responsibility to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in court that this assault took place. And so without the victim's cooperation, what I'm saying is these arrests usually end up not going to court. They end up either being plea bargained or dismissed, because without the victim's testimony, without that, it's difficult to get over that beyond a reasonable doubt burden of proof. So that being said, we have kind of an uphill battle when it comes to that. But so that's really what this week's lessons are about, is the kind of the phenomenon of domestic violence and our response to it. So at the scene, we pretty much treat it like any other disturbance, but there is an exception, and that comes in that we can pursue and make an arrest without having a cooperative victim, without the victim wanting to press charges, because in a domestic violence situation, the law allows us to do that. And, again, if it's a repeated, we get called back thing, the law requires that we do that. In Missouri, other states, it doesn't even matter if you've been, if you have to go back, like from the get. In some states, it's mandatory if you have the evidence. Now, you have to have the evidence, right? But if you can meet the probable cause standard, you can make the arrest, knowing, though, that without the victim cooperation, it's probably not going to stick in court. So that's that's everything for this week. The only assignments we're going to have is the discussion boards. So have a good afternoon.